They say true courage is often the quietest thing in the room, not in medals or parades, but in the way a man carries himself when no one else is looking. Some stories are whispered, not shouted, yet they matter just the same. This is the story of Walter Dean, a man the world forgot until one day the world remembered. If you believe some stories are worth keeping alive, stay with me and don't forget to follow, like, and leave a comment below. Your support keeps voices like Walter's from being silenced. Walter Dean entered Evelyn's diner the same way he always did. Slow, steady steps marked by the faint tap of his cane against the linoleum floor. The bell over the door gave its soft jingle, announcing him without fanfare. No one turned their head. No one greeted him. It was Thursday morning, and for the past 8 years, this was his place. His table by the window, the same cracked vinyl booth where once, long ago, he had shared apple pie with his wife. The army jacket he wore had grown thin, its fabric frayed at the elbows. A small pin near the collar caught the morning light. 3rd Infantry Division. It was not there for decoration, not there for stories. It was simply part of him, as much as the lined hands that gripped his cane or the stiff hip that slowed his stride. He slid into the booth and folded his hands neatly in front of him, quiet as always. Across the counter, Tina the waitress noticed him. She couldn't have been older than 22, with a blonde ponytail pulled tight and eyeliner that made her blue eyes sharper than they needed to be. She raised her eyebrows, rolled her eyes, and finally spoke. "Coffee?" Her voice was flat, as though it were a chore. "Yes, ma'am," Walter said gently. "That would be nice." She sighed as if the simple request were heavy, filled a mug, and set it down harder than needed. The porcelain rattled against the saucer. "Anything else?" she asked, her tone laced with impatience. Just here for story time again?" Walter blinked, then gave the smallest of smiles, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just coffee, thank you." Tina turned away, muttering toward the cook behind the counter. "He told me last week he helped rescue POWs in Korea. Week before that, it was Normandy. Can't even keep his fake wars straight." A couple in the corner booth chuckled. One leaned in and whispered, "He always sits there, right? Like he's waiting to be noticed." Walter heard every word. He sat still, not flinching, not arguing. Instead, he reached into his wallet, fingers careful with the leather, and pulled out a photograph so worn its corners had gone soft. 3 young men in uniform smiled from the faded image. One of them had his arm around Walter's shoulder. They looked strong, proud, alive. Tina walked past again, glancing at the picture. "You know, you don't have to pretend. You could just order pancakes like everyone else." Walter looked up at her, his gaze tired but steady. "I'm not pretending," he said softly. She scoffed and kept walking. He turned back toward the window, the photo resting in his hand. Beyond the glass, Main Street stretched out, quiet in the mid-morning light. Cars rolled by, a delivery truck stopped at the curb, and a mother guided her child across the crosswalk. Walter stayed fixed on the view, though his mind drifted to years when life moved faster, when boots hit gravel, when engines rattled under fire, and when brothers in arms trusted him with their lives. The voices behind him carried on. Someone said he probably told people he'd shaken Eisenhower's hand. Another laughed, louder this time. The spatula on the grill was the only sound that didn't join in. Walter folded the photograph, tucked it carefully back into his wallet, and lifted the mug with both hands. The coffee was hot, bitter, grounding. He didn't drink much of it. His throat felt dry, not from thirst, but from something heavier. He placed a crisp $5 bill beneath the cup, though the price was less. He always left extra. Always. His wife used to say it was good manners, and Walter had never forgotten her words. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cane. Not from weakness, not yet. His hands had been steady through years of holding bolts, tools, and engines in places too hot, too loud, too close to danger. These were not the shakes of fear or age. They were the tremors of a man carrying too many miles behind him. He pushed himself to his feet, his back hunched forward, curved by time, not by shame. No one helped. No one moved. The diner door opened then, the bell ringing again as cold air swept in. A few heads turned, but Walter did not. He only adjusted the small pin on his jacket, his fingers brushing it as though to remind himself it still belonged there. The diner wasn't crowded that morning. A trucker ate quietly near the back. A mother helped her son cut dinosaur-shaped pancakes. The boy, no more than 7 or 8, had been watching Walter for some time, curiosity shining in his wide eyes. Walter steadied himself by the edge of the table, his cane planted firmly, ready to begin the slow journey out. The room's hum of voices and laughter pressed at his back, but he did not answer it. He simply breathed, collected what little dignity he could, and prepared to move. The boy's small sneakers scraped the floor. He slid from his booth, ignoring his mother's half-hearted warning, and stepped forward. He looked up at Walter, his voice soft but sure. "Were you really in the army?" Walter paused, startled. For a moment, he simply looked down at the boy. Then a gentle smile crossed his lips, one that erased years from his face. "A long time ago," he replied. The boy nodded. "My grandpa was too. He had medals." "Do you got medals?" Walter reached slowly into the pocket of his jacket. His fingers found a small velvet pouch. He drew it out and opened it carefully, revealing a bronze star, its once bright surface dulled with age. The boy's eyes widened, his mouth opened in awe. Before he could speak again, his mother rushed over, her hand gripping his shoulder. "Come on, don't bother the man," she said quickly, pulling him back. "Go sit down." She gave Walter a brief, awkward smile, a half apology without weight, and returned to her booth. Walter slipped the medal back into his pocket, his smile fading into the stillness that surrounded him. Behind the counter, Tina leaned on one hip, watching. "Showing off your little coin again?" she said with a smirk. "You know you can buy those online." Walter said nothing. His gaze drifted back to the window, where sunlight caught the passing cars. He held the cane tighter, his knuckles pale against the wood. When he tried to step forward, his leg faltered. The cane wobbled, and he caught himself on the edge of the table. The chair scraped loudly across the floor, turning heads at last. But no one moved to help. No one rose. Walter steadied himself again, breathing carefully, forcing balance into each slow step. His other hand reached into his pocket. Another folded bill joined the first beneath the half-empty mug. His offering, his quiet parting. The door was only a few steps away. His heart carried him forward, one patient stride after another, though his body resisted. The cane tapped the tile softly, a beat that measured both strength and struggle. The bell above the diner door rang again. Another figure entered. Heavy boots, a stride that was calm, measured, steady. Walter did not turn. He only lowered his head slightly, his fingers once more brushing the pin on his jacket. A man does not need to look to know when the air in a room has shifted. The diner settled into an uneasy hush, the sound of the bell fading as the door swung shut behind the newcomer. Walter kept his eyes forward, his cane planted firmly on the floor. His back was stiff, his breath controlled, though the tremor in his hands betrayed the weight he carried. The young boy who had spoken to him earlier sat at his booth again, pushing his dinosaur pancakes around the plate without eating. His eyes, however, kept wandering to Walter, curiosity stronger than his mother's hurried warnings. The boy's sneaker tapped nervously against the bench as though fighting the urge to get up again. The newcomer's boots echoed against the tile as he moved across the diner. He hadn't spoken a word yet, but his presence filled the space, altering the rhythm of everything around him. Walter adjusted his jacket, straightened his shoulders slightly, and pressed onward toward the door. Before he could reach it, the boy broke free from his mother's watch again. Small feet carried him across the floor, sneakers scuffing the tiles. He looked up at Walter with the same earnestness, his voice hushed but steady. "Were you scared?" Walter blinked, pausing mid-step. He turned his head slowly, his gaze softening at the boy's question. For a long breath, he said nothing. Then, with the quiet honesty of someone who had lived long enough to see truth outweigh pride, he answered. "Sometimes," he said, "but we got through it. That's what mattered." The boy nodded as though he understood. "My grandpa said brave people get scared too." Walter's lips curved into the smallest smile. "Your grandpa was right." The mother appeared quickly again, her hand gripping the boy's arm more firmly this time. Her expression was tight, embarrassed. "I told you, don't bother him." She pulled her son back toward their booth, offering Walter another strained smile that carried no real apology. Walter let it pass, He had grown used to empty gestures. He shifted his weight onto his cane, steadying himself for the final steps to the door. But the boy's voice called out one more time across the diner, softer now, almost shy. "Do you still have your medal?" Walter's hand moved to his jacket pocket instinctively, fingers brushing the velvet pouch hidden inside. He didn't answer aloud. Instead, he looked back at the boy and gave a small nod. The boy's face lit up, a fleeting spark of wonder before his mother hushed him again. Behind the counter, Tina watched the exchange with a smirk tugging at her lips. She leaned closer, her voice cutting across the room. "Showing off again? You know you can buy those online for $30. Comes with a certificate and everything." A couple of men at the counter chuckled, the sound low but sharp enough to pierce. Walter's jaw tightened, though he didn't respond. His cane tapped the floor as he took another step, slow and careful. He had grown accustomed to mockery, to disbelief. Words could bruise, but they could not undo the years he carried. Still, when his knee buckled and his cane slipped slightly, the scrape of his chair against the floor rang louder than the laughter. Walter caught himself on the table, his hand gripping the edge with knuckles white against strain. His breath hitched, sharp and quick, but he steadied himself before the fall could claim him. The room glanced his way, curiosity flickering for a moment, but no one rose. No one offered a hand. Walter inhaled deeply, his chest lifting with the effort. He set his cane firmly again, his other hand sliding into his pocket. He pulled out another folded bill, worn and creased, and placed it beside the first beneath his coffee cup. His offering was always more than the grand vow, never less. He turned back toward the door, his steps a quiet battle between dignity and frailty. And then, just as he reached for the handle, the bell above the door chimed once more. The figure who had entered earlier now stood fully revealed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture precise without being stiff. The pressed fabric of his uniform caught the light. Marine Corps dress blues, rows of ribbons neatly aligned across his chest, silver eagles gleaming at his collar. The room stilled, as if time itself had paused. Even the spatula on the grill came to rest in the cook's hand. The chatter died mid-breath, laughter dissolving into silence. Walter stopped, his hand resting on the doorframe. Slowly, cautiously, he turned his head. His eyes met the newcomers, and something unspoken passed between them. The boy leaned forward in his booth, his small face full of awe. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering urgently, "Mom, look." But she said nothing. The colonel's boots struck the floor in slow, deliberate steps. He moved with a calm authority, the kind born not from arrogance, but from years spent in rooms where lives hung in the balance. His gaze never wavered from Walter. The diner held its breath. Walter stood straighter, adjusting the pin on his jacket one final time. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "Yes, sir." The colonel stopped in front of him, tall and steady. He did not strike right away. Instead, he removed his hat, holding it to his chest with a reverence that commanded silence. No one in the room moved. Not Tina, frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. Not the couple at the booth who had laughed moments before. Even the child sat perfectly still, eyes wide. The colonel's voice, when it finally came, was deep, respectful, and carried through the room with a weight that could not be ignored. "Sergeant Walter Dean," he said. Walter blinked, his throat tightening. "Yes, sir," he repeated softly. The colonel nodded once firmly. "I've waited a long time to meet you." The diner walls seemed to close in, every ear straining, every eye fixed on the two men standing at the door. The colonel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small navy blue box, holding it carefully as if it were glass. And just like that, the air inside Evelyn's diner changed forever. The box the colonel held was no larger than his palm, but the way he carried it made it seem heavier than anything else in the room. He stopped just a step away from Walter, his hat pressed against his chest, his eyes fixed with steady recognition. "Your name came up often," the colonel said, voice even but full of weight. "At Quantico, at Fort Bragg, and again at a reunion last year I almost didn't attend." Walter's brow furrowed. His grip on the cane tightened, and he shifted slightly, unsure whether he had misheard. His life had been quiet for so long that the idea of his name carried elsewhere felt impossible. The colonel continued, "I don't expect you to remember me, But the man who trained me, he spoke about you often, called you the best mechanic under fire he ever served with, said you fixed his truck during an ambush in '68 and got his unit out before the medevac arrived. Walter's lips parted, but no words came. His breath caught in his throat. Memory surged forward, fragments of smoke, fire, the roar of engines, the sound of men shouting through chaos. He remembered turning a wrench in the dark, his fingers burned raw, the metal groaning beneath him. He remembered not thinking of metals, only of keeping a vehicle alive long enough to carry brothers to safety. The colonel extended the small box. His name was Captain Dale Mercer. He died 2 years ago, but before he passed, he wanted this delivered, if we ever found you. Walter's hands shook as he accepted the box, his cane balancing precariously against the frame of the door. He opened it slowly with the care of someone handling something sacred. Inside lay a polished coin, gleaming faintly beneath the diner's dim lights, and a folded letter, its edges softened with time. The colonel stepped back half a pace, still holding his hat, giving Walter the space to breathe. The silence in the diner thickened. Even the cook's steady hands had stilled on the grill. Every pair of eyes watched, not with judgment now, but with something else, something they hadn't offered before. Walter's thumb brushed over the letter's surface. On the outside, written in faded blue ink, were the words, "For Walter, if he's still out there." His chest rose and fell, unsteady. For the first time in years, the tremor in his hands came not from age, but from something deeper. Memory, recognition, the sudden realization that he had not been forgotten after all. The colonel's voice lowered, softer now. He didn't forget. None of them did. Walter tried to speak, but his voice failed. All that emerged was a breath, a long exhale that carried more than words ever could. Finally, he gave the smallest nod, his eyes shimmering, though no tears fell. Across the diner, the air had changed. The customers who had laughed earlier now sat frozen in their seats, their faces pale with quiet shame. Tina stood rooted by the coffee machine, her hand still gripping the pot, but her posture no longer dismissive. The boy leaned forward on his elbows, his eyes wide with wonder. The colonel replaced his hat carefully beneath his arm, then placed a firm hand on Walter's shoulder. It was not heavy, not commanding, only steady. "I wanted you to know," he said. "Men like you kept us alive. That's never just fixing things. That's everything." The words struck harder than applause, harder than medals. They carried a truth Walter had never spoken aloud, not even to himself. He had lived years believing his part was small, mechanical, unworthy of recognition. Yet here, in this diner filled with strangers and silence, the truth rang clear. From the back booth, the cook stepped out, apron still tied around his waist. He stood tall, his face solemn. Then, without a word, he clapped once. The sound echoed through the diner like a command. He clapped again, slower this time, steady. Another joined in, a man in a postal jacket near the door. Then another. The sound grew, not loud, not forced, but enough to fill the room with something missing since Walter had walked in. Respect. Walter stood motionless, overwhelmed. The colonel gave one last nod, his posture straight, his boots tapping once against the tile. Then, without ceremony, he turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him. The silence he left behind was not empty. It was full. Walter lowered himself back into his booth, his body heavy, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. He placed the navy blue box gently on the table beside his coffee. His hands trembled as he opened the letter, slower this time, his fingers smoothing the creased paper. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, written by someone fighting time. "If someone finds this before I go, give it to Walter Dean. He saved a unit of 14 men, me included, in the middle of a firefight under a smoking engine. He didn't ask for thanks, just handed me the keys and said, 'Try not to stall her.'" Walter's lips parted into a faint smile. He remembered saying it, though he hadn't thought anyone would. The letter continued, "Men like him don't get statues. They get forgotten. But I didn't forget. We owe him more than he'll ever admit. Sincerely, Dale Mercer." Walter folded the letter carefully, his breath steadying. He placed it back in the box, resting his hand on top as though sealing it into memory. Tina moved at last, walking slowly from behind the counter. Her usual sharpness was gone. She refilled the sugar jar without looking at him, then paused, her voice low. "I didn't know," she said. Walter looked up, meeting her eyes. "I didn't expect you to." She hesitated. "Was it hard?" He thought a moment, then nodded faintly. "Some parts. Others, you just get through." Tina's lips pressed together. She gave the smallest nod, then walked away. Not fast, not dismissive, just quiet. The boy, unable to stay seated, called softly from his booth. "Is that your friend's letter?" Walter nodded. "Did you save his life?" the boy asked. Walter drew in a breath, then let it out slowly. "I was just doing my job." The boy smiled, his voice certain. "My grandpa would have liked you." Walter's lips curved again, gentler this time. "I would have liked him too." The diner no longer felt hostile. The laughter was not gone entirely, but it had changed, lighter, less cruel, more careful. For the first time in years, Walter did not feel invisible. He felt seen. He rested his hand on the box beside his coffee and looked out the window. The world beyond seemed softer now, touched by the weight of memory and the presence of honor reclaimed. The moment had shifted everything, though Walter said nothing more. Sometimes silence carries the truest words. Walter sat in silence, his hand resting on the box as if anchoring himself to the moment. The coffee in front of him had gone cold, untouched, but it no longer mattered. The letter was real, the coin was real, and so was the respect he had thought the world had long forgotten. The boy across the room still watched him, chin propped on his small hands, eyes wide with a kind of reverence too pure to be taught. Walter gave him a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, and the boy's smile widened, bright and unguarded. From the counter, Tina approached again. This time she didn't roll her eyes or sigh. She carried a fresh mug and poured carefully, setting it down in front of him with both hands, the gesture slow and deliberate. She didn't say much, only, "Here, it's hot." Her tone carried no sharpness now, only quiet respect. Walter lifted his gaze to her, saw the faint tremor in her lip, as though she wanted to say more but couldn't. He gave her a nod, gentle and forgiving. She straightened, cleared her throat, and turned back toward the counter without another word. The boy slipped out of his booth once more, clutching a small notepad and pencil. He stepped carefully toward Walter's attainment, his mother calling after him with exasperation, but not moving to stop him. "Can I write down one of your stories?" the boy asked, his voice a mix of eagerness and shyness. "For school?" Walter chuckled softly, the sound rusty but warm. "Most of my stories are just busted engines and muddy boots, nothing fancy." "I like those," the boy replied quickly, pencil poised. "They sound real." Walter leaned back slightly, letting the boy sit across from him. He thought a moment, then told him about a night in Germany when a Jeep's wrench snapped in the middle of a downpour. With no time to lose, Walter had fixed the engine using nothing more than a spoon borrowed from a field mess kit. The Jeep roared to life, carrying soldiers back to safety. The boy laughed, scribbling furiously, his pencil barely keeping up. "That's awesome," he said, eyes wide. "You're like a hero with tools." Walter's smile grew, faint lines creasing his cheeks. He hadn't felt useful in a long time, not until this moment, not until a child's eyes lit up with wonder at a memory he had nearly buried. One by one, others in the diner began to move. The man in the postal jacket approached first, removing his cap respectfully. "My father served in Korea," he said quietly. "You reminded me of him today." He extended his hand. Walter rose slowly, steadying himself with his cane, and accepted the handshake firmly. "Thank you," he said simply, because sometimes that was enough. A school teacher came next, someone who had seen him walking the neighborhood for years but never spoken. She offered a nod and a quiet, "I'm glad you're here." A trucker followed, saying nothing at all, only placing a folded $20 bill beside Walter's coffee as a gesture of thanks. The cook, who had started the applause earlier, returned to the grill, but not before giving Walter a steady look and a nod that carried more weight than words. Walter's booth, once a place of isolation, had become a space of recognition. The same table where he had sat invisible week after week now glowed with an unspoken shift. Tina returned one final time, carrying a slice of apple pie on a small plate. She set it down gently in front of him, her hands careful, her voice lower than before. "For her," she said quietly. Walter looked up, startled. "I saw the photo in your wallet once," she added softly. She looked kind. "She was," Walter said, his voice warm, carrying the faint tremor of memory. He took a bite, slow and deliberate. The crust crumbled, sweet and familiar, tasting not only of apples, but of all the Thursdays past when his wife had smiled across from him. For the first time in years, the pie didn't taste like loneliness. It tasted like memory, alive again. The diner returned to its rhythm, though changed. The laughter rose again, but softer now, tempered with respect. Walter was no longer just an old man in a worn jacket. He was seen. By the time he stepped outside, the sun had begun to set, casting the street in a soft orange glow his wife once called angel light. He walked slowly down Main Street, his cane tapping gently against the pavement. The box with the letter rested inside his coat pocket, not to display, not to prove anything, but to keep close because some things were worth carrying. As he passed the old library, a mural caught his eye. He had walked by it before, barely noticing, but today he stopped. It showed a soldier, not in battle, not in triumph, but as an older man in uniform, holding the hand of a child. No name was written, no plaque explained, just dignity painted across brick and stone. A woman walking her dog paused beside him. "That's new," she said, noticing his gaze. "Kids from the school painted it, said it's for the veterans no one talks about." Walter gave a quiet nod. He didn't tell her it looked familiar. He didn't say thank you. Some things spoke for themselves. When he finally returned home, he placed the folded letter in a drawer beside his wife's photograph. He looked at it longer than usual before switching off the lamp. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The quiet in his house was the same as always, but his heart felt different. Not heavy, not burdened, seen. Because sometimes a story doesn't need to be shouted to matter. Sometimes it only needs to be remembered. And that night, Walter Dean slept lighter than he had in years. Stories like Walter's remind us that dignity and sacrifice do not fade with time. Even in silence, respect remains the greatest honor. If this story touched you, don't forget to follow, like, and leave a comment below. Share it with someone who believes respect for veterans should never be forgotten.